Welcome to Free Exchange. I'm Howard Wall, the director of the Hammond Institute for Free Enterprise. And we're very pleased to have as our guest today Stephen Moore, who is on the editorial board of the Wall Street Journal. Welcome, Stephen.
Hey, great to be here. Congratulations about the new center.
This is fantastic. It's great news for, well, obviously for me, which is really what it's all about, students. But also,
right.
also
it's all about me, right?
Also the university. It's really a great day, and I'm glad you were able to join us
today. A lot of college campuses, free enterprise is almost a dirty word, so it's really exciting to see a center that celebrates and educates people about entrepreneurship and free enterprise.
Yeah, and it's perhaps only this could have happened at Lindenwood at this time, and we're very excited. We think we're going to move forward and do some great things. Now, if check out on LUTV, there should be a recording of Mr. Moore's speech he gave. It's the inaugural speech for the Hammond Institute, and we're here after that speech, and I wanted to follow up on some of the things that he brought up. And so I'm from upstate New York, and in upstate New York, you mentioned that the Marcellus Shale is in upstate New York, and fracking is right now not legal in the state of New York. And you also mentioned that fracking and natural gas and energy is the thing to unlock growth in the United States. And whenever I go back to upstate New York, or to New York, I'm just amazed at the sheer stupidity of a place that has been in economic doldrums for decades, where they won't just suck out this almost free stuff from the ground and sell it.
It's like buried treasure. No, it
exactly.
is, right? It's like you're sitting in New York on $500 billion of buried treasure, and you say, just leave it in the ground. This is a problem in a lot of the blue liberal states that they don't want to. They think fracking is evil, and so it's become a kind of bugaboo. But fracking is nothing really actually new. We've been using fracking since the first time oil drills were drilled in this country. What's different is it's just much more productive, and by the way, cleaner than it's ever been. It's interesting about New York, because they have something called horizontal drilling, where you can go down and then go sideways. In Pennsylvania, they're going down and they're going underneath New York, and they're taking,
they're taking New York
gas. So but it is craziness, because you talk about those areas. I know the area you're talking about. Those are very economically depressed towns, and you know what? The people who live in those towns, hell yes, they want fracking. They want those jobs. I mean, you go to towns now like Wheeling, West Virginia, which used to be a very economically depressed area. They have something like 200 new millionaires in that town because of fracking, and there's jobs, economic developments. You're right. It's the rich people in Manhattan who don't want the fracking. Not the people who will actually live in those towns.
Yeah, no, I'm constantly amazed, and often it seems to be a competition between, even locally. There's I heard one oil person say that, fracking, they say it's dangerous because it uses chemicals, but it's trace amounts. And he said, we could do fracking with peanut butter if we had to. It's just that this is cheaper.
Well, you know what? Look, let's accept the proposition that there are dangers with fracking. But you know what? There's dangers with everything. I mean, I just wrote a piece for the Wall Street Journal about wind power. The wind industry kills 500,000 birds every year. So
some of them bald eagles.
Bald eagles, golden eagles. So that's a cost, right? And you need and a lot of areas don't. If they try to rely on renewable energy, they need coal-powered fire plants to back up the renewable energy. So all of these things have costs. There was an article about this coal train that derailed and killed a number of people. So every form of energy has risks and costs. And my point about fracking is, okay, if we're worried about water pollution, and there are some legitimate risks here, we can do this. We can figure out how to do it in a way that's safe, and we can hold the industry accountable if there are spills.
Well, and I think the state of Pennsylvania has actually done a great job of weighing the costs and benefits, and they have some very reasonable regulations that are high on safety, but also allow it to happen. Yeah. And they're having to recycle the water, because my understanding is a big problem. There were actually earthquakes caused by fracking, but it wasn't fracking. It was they were getting rid of their wastewater by injecting it back into the earth.
Right.
So in Pennsylvania, they don't allow it.
I'm not a geologist, so I don't know all about the earthquake issue. Is a legitimate one. But again, if we have the capacity and the know-how to drill 3 miles deep in the ground and go 2 miles sideways and then crack through these rocks with these microscopic drills, then we can also figure out how to protect our, look, everyone wants to protect the drinking water, right? You do, I do, anyone does. We want to make sure we do this in a safe way. And by the way, I would make the case to you that the drilling that we do now is much safer for the water than the drilling that we did, 50 years ago, when a lot of the stuff spilled into the water supply.
Sure, and no, it's remarkable how much opposition there is. And this brings me to.
But you know what? That's because this is such an important point. I heard Heidi Heitkamp, who's the new Democrat from North Dakota, talking about fracking, and she was being attacked by all these liberals. Oh my God, fracking, it's so terrible. She really disarmed them. She said, how many of you people in this room know what fracking is? And not a single person raised their hand. They don't. So it's just become a term of art. When you see people know fracking, it's just become a bugaboo. I think if you explain to people how it really works and the benefits and the risks, I think people would be all for it.
Yeah, no, and I've said in interviews that we have a Democratic governor, and I said if we found that we had oil or gas underneath and all it took was injecting some water into the ground, he'd be out there with his shovel.
You're for sure. You could have 5 of these free enterprise centers.
That's right.
If you did.
Yeah, no, and also this brings me to the Keystone XL pipeline,
Yes.
Because one of the things you said, you qualified yourself when you're optimistic about the future because we're sitting on all this energy, and if we do this right, then we can really grow quite a lot. This can be the key to the future. And I'm not sure, at least the current administration has any chance of doing it right. And the Keystone XL pipeline seems to me to be a good example of that.
Look, the Keystone pipeline would be valuable, but even if we don't build the pipeline, we're still going to. I mean, for example, when I was in North Dakota, what they do is they actually burn off with flares at night the natural gas. So what they want is the oil, because that's much more valuable than the. So I asked the people, why are you burning off this natural gas? It's kind of a waste of the resource. Yeah. And they say, well, because they don't have the pipelines to get it to the market. So we're wasting a lot of our resources by not building these pipelines. But let me give you another example of a real danger. So just a week or two ago, the president and his EPA director basically put these new regulations on coal-burning fire plants. Now, in America today, we still get almost 40% of our electricity from coal. This is a major, domestic source of energy for us. And under these new regulations, we're not going to build any new coal fire plants anymore in this country. That's a really stupid thing to do. I mean, that means it puts our energy supply in real danger, and it's going to mean electricity prices are more expensive.
Yeah, and it's. Windmills are not going to replace.
Right. They're just not. I always tell people, if you look at all the money that we've thrown in wind and solar power, and look, in some markets, Phoenix, Arizona, solar might make sense, or in some, parts of Texas, wind power make sense, but you can't power a $16 trillion economy with wind and solar power. You just can't. Ask Germany. They tried to do it and didn't work there. So we need all forms of energy, and here's my point. Get rid of all the subsidies. If there's subsidies for oil and gas, get rid of those. If there's subsidies for wind, let's let the marketplace determine which form of electricity we have. If wind can compete, I'm all for it.
Sure, yeah. Yeah, no, definitely. And
but it can't.
So we had Robert Bryce came to campus about 2 years ago, and he gave a talk about the future of energy. So you might know him in the National Review, he writes some things.
Who is this?
Robert Bryce.
Oh, I thought you said Robert Reich. Yeah, Robert Bryce. He's a smart guy.
not Robert Reich. No,
yeah.
He would be very different.
I debate him all the time.
A very different talk, and he had a great line, which was, the electric car is the future, and it has been since 1910.
Yeah,
right. So there are these pipe dreams. Yeah. Not literally, unfortunately, but there are these pipe dreams that you can just create some magical device that will burn clean and
there's another saying I use all the time, that you can build windmills with steel, but you can't build steel with windmills.
That's actually a good one too. Yeah, and I know in Missouri also we have some windmills and we have some subsidies, and maybe it's not a particular Missouri problem, but it does seem that the windmill subsidies went to connected people.
That's the whole problem.
This is a big risk with any of these things, even because I don't believe that they have the best interests in their heart all of the time.
This is part of the problem
of
kind of crony capitalism, and this happens in both parties. But if you look at who some of the biggest Democratic supporters, financial supporters of President Obama, it's a lot of people who've invested very heavily in renewable energy. So they have a big financial stake in this. So they're telling President Obama, you know, stop the coal, stop the oil and gas, stop the pipelines, to force feed the country on wind and solar, because they're very worried about whether they'll be able to make money. The problem with wind and solar, by the way, is 5 years ago, wind and solar looked really economically competitive. Guess what they never counted on was that natural gas would drop from $14 to $4. And so it's almost impossible for wind and solar to compete with $4 natural gas.
And the answer to that is, of course, more subsidies. because
or tax, or make it impossible to bring gas to the market.
Right. So if it's competition preventing it, then we must quash the competition.
You know, the other interesting issue here is that the natural gas price is much lower in the United States than it is anywhere else, because natural gas is not easy to transport. Unlike oil, which has a global price, natural gas, there's a different price everywhere. So we pay $4 for natural gas. In Europe, they pay 10. In China, they pay 12. So what the natural gas industry wants to do is export this stuff. But all the people who use the natural gas, like the chemical industry, they're fighting a big battle in Washington to prevent the natural gas industry from exporting it, because they want to use it themselves and they don't want their competitors to have access to. So there's all these internal fights. Every industry in Washington has a self-interest, and that's why it's best to let the free enterprise system work, and that's why I love this center.
Yeah, and what's the other good example is the Keystone XL pipeline. They still move the oil, but it's on rail. Yeah. And one of the big opponents of the Keystone XL pipeline has been Warren Buffett.
Yeah, and he owns
who owns the railroads.
I mean, the railroad, yes, that's right.
So,
you know, it's amazing how many times you find these vested self-interests in people who you think are acting in the public interest.
Sure. Now, is there anything else that strikes you that we should look out for?
Well, the only other thing is, that we're in the midst of this huge battle in Washington over the budget, and I'll just simply say this: that I do think it's kind of crazy to shut down the government, but I do think these are fights over big ideas about how much are we going to spend, much are we going to continue to borrow, and the way I put it is, look, we can't continue as a nation to borrow $1 trillion year after year. It just doesn't work. We're not going to be a great nation if we keep doing that, and so I believe the biggest issue for our country right now is, what are we going to do about this Obamacare law? I've been in Washington for 25 years, and I would say Obamacare is maybe the worst piece of legislation passed in terms of what it's going to do to the quality of our health, but it's also in terms of how it's going to destroy jobs.
I couldn't agree with you more. And thank you very much, Stephen. That's the end of this part of Free Exchange, and we just spoke to Stephen Moore, who's on the editorial board of the Wall Street Journal. And come back and we'll talk to Joe Haslag from University of Missouri. Hi, welcome back to Free Exchange. I'm Howard Wall, the director of the Hammond Institute for Free Enterprise. And we're here today with Joe Haslag from the University of Missouri, who is the Kenneth Lay Chair of Economics. Thanks for sitting down and talking with me.
Thank you. It's been a great day and just so exciting to see the kickoff to the Hammond lectures and everything.
Yeah, and thanks for being part of it. I think it was a good kickoff, and the inaugural event, so we're going to have more, so our viewers can look up those. Now, I'm going to ask you a question. It's a little bit of a lead up to the question, okay. But there are one fact I want to point out, and I saw this the other day. It was a map with the 5 richest counties in the United States by per capita income.
Okay.
And 3 of them were suburbs of the District of Columbia. And then there was another in New Mexico, Los Alamos, and then one in New Jersey. And to me, this suggested to me that we have what's been called on some blogs I read, the Hunger Games economy, okay. Where there's a capital city, and the purpose of the rest of the economy or the country is to support this rich, prosperous capital city, and then there's poverty in the rest of the country. And for some reason, I can't help think that this is an analogy that I can use to describe policy over the last few years. So what do you think of that? Just give me some teaching suggestions here.
The fun part is, it sounds like it's good to be a scientist, right? Whether it's social or I'm guessing New Mexico is Los Alamos. I'm guessing New Jersey is Princeton.
So if you're not a lobbyist, go to Princeton, get a job at Princeton,
that's right.
Or be a nuclear scientist.
Or if you have any kind of social science skills, you want to go be a lobbyist, because apparently those are great rates of return. So I'm encouraged by that. Markets work. Look, what it tells me is people are extraordinarily clever and they find lots of ways to enrich themselves. And it's a little bit sad that being a lobbyist or sort of some sort of government activity is paying that higher rate of return. But it's good to see the data, and it's good to see that that those things have a payoff in a weird and perverse way.
Well, it's a bit odd to me because there's a rent-seeking society, right?
Yeah.
So there's so much resources being spent just seeking government favor.
Yeah.
And you think about what's being produced in Washington, D.C., they don't produce cars, they don't produce steels, they don't even produce services except to serve each other.
And arguably maybe not good government.
And that's what the market there is for power.
Yeah.
Political power and influence.
Yeah.
And this is not, by the way, doesn't seem just from the Obama administration, it's sped up, but if you look at Washington, D.C.'s share of national income, it's been rising steadily, and it seems to be recession-proof. Now, you're from, you currently live in Columbia. Is this happening in Jefferson City, or is there any analogous thing going on locally?
Well, I try not to spend too much time in Jefferson City. I do on a couple of occasions for part of I participate in the consensus revenue forecast for the state of Missouri, so I'm down there a couple of days. You don't see people in government getting rich, but you do see the rent seekers who can try and pry money out. The idea of crony capitalism. You just had a Steve Moore interview, and Steve mentioned that. Those are huge risks, and those are. While they enrich the people who are participating in them to a certain extent, they don't enrich society in any particular way. So it's just moving resources around to whoever can provide the biggest claim that they're going to. And that's the part that's the most disturbing about it is social science has created a group of people who would, as models would predict, right, are rent seekers. I don't have any problem with that. What we don't have is anybody doing any vetting to see whether those rent-seeking activities are worthwhile or not. Somehow we're either relying on our friends to steer us right, or we're relying on what we believe to be this sort of magic multiplier that, sure, they're a friend, I know them, I trust them, I'm going to give them $1 and I know I'm going to get $2.40 back. We got to do a better job of
So in Missouri, the last few years, there's been a big debate about tax credits, state tax credits. And Missouri, I believe, is the leading state per capita for these development tax credits.
Tax credits that exist, and there's a lot that get authorized every year. Yeah.
And I know the governor has gone full in on this.
Yeah.
And he's touted all sorts of results. And one thing that comes out whenever they're talking about this, and this is what we talked about in our event, was kind of the economic education and multipliers, is they say the effect of the tax credit, it's right there before you. Yeah. It's, look, I gave this company a tax credit, they built this factory, now there are 50 people working there, therefore the tax credit caused the jobs. Yeah,
so...
and then there are multiplier effects that
right, there are multipliers that magically appear from that. So the Department of Economic Development, I do think that they've got noble goals. I'm not going to aspire to no casting aspersions on what their motives are. However, it is true that there's not a single economist there are people with that title, but there's not anybody in Jefferson City in the Department of Economic Development who actually has any ability to make a strong case that these tax credits are worthwhile. Now, the strong case would be that there's some kind of market failure that's going on, and they're providing a service by addressing that market failure. That's what governments do. That's why we have property rights and roads and all sorts of things. And more importantly, so you mentioned this before, it ends up being a thing about power, accumulating power rather than talking about anything serious. So whenever somebody tries to vet these things and say, well, what's the rate of return on that? I think the biggest failure we have is the lack of an accounting system, the lack of accountability, to literally say what's the rate of return on the amount spent on these tax credits, because they talk about the 50 jobs that are created and they point to these things, yet what we don't know is what would the rate of return if it was spent on something else. They don't ever address the idea of what economists call opportunity cost.
Right, and they somehow it's the magical jobs are created for people who hadn't been working before.
Now
And
we've
there's
got
no
a great
substitution.
we've got a great example in Columbia, the state of Missouri. Also through the city of Columbia provided tax incentives for IBM to come in and create a center where the center was supposed to create 200 jobs. They talked about all of the effects that this was going to have, 200 people moving here. Well, 200 people didn't move there. At the end of the day, the maximum number of jobs that were created were 80, and IBM has now said, well, we're even going to cut some of those jobs and move them somewhere else. But they've got a piece of land and a building where they pay almost no rent. They don't pay any property taxes. These are great deals for businesses. Businesses are rent seekers too. They're filled with rent seekers. So I understand why IBM did it. That's not the point. The point is it good public policy? And those questions have to be asked and vetted through some systematic procedure that we can understand what the rates of return are and the dollars spent on them.
Now, I've looked a lot at the Department of Economic Development's projections, and like I said, they don't have qualified economists, meaning PhD economists who do this sort of stuff.
It's akin to saying a kid with one semester of biology should be operating, doing brain surgery, right?
Well, in fact, they farm it out. They buy a model, a REMI model, which is a forecasting model, which, as you probably know, it's a local version of a 1960s or 70s Keynesian multiplier model, where you basically assume that if you inject a dollar magically from somewhere, and they don't say where it comes from, then magic things happen and you get twice as much back.
You get more bakers and butchers and candlestick makers.
Right, by giving $1 million.
Because everybody, the $1 million is going to go to somebody. They're going to be enriched. They're going to want to buy more meat, more candlesticks, more all sorts of more bread, and that just expands the economy. So.
Now, I often wonder why it is that people don't, because economists, professional economists know all of this, and we say it, but public policymakers don't, do they not care, or they're not listening, or we're doing a bad job?
Well, so I'm going to submit that economists are rent seekers too, and that somehow for the right price they can be coerced into thinking, into spitting the party line. I think there are examples early in this administration's Council of Economic Advisors. They had some very talented people that had been brought into D.C. who had written extensively on the role of tax cuts versus government purchases expenditures and their role in expanding the economy. And yet, as a mouthpiece, they were more than willing to go out and say, we need an $850 billion expansion.
Completely disowned their own
results. And in fact, results that were sometimes being published at about the same time that the American Economic Review published a couple of papers by some of the council members that disputed the very things that they were touting. So
now, I won't disagree with you that economists are rent seekers too. So I can be bought, but I'm not cheap.
Yeah.
So that's my virtue, is I'm not cheap.
That's right. That's
but I'm available. But so far, no takers.
We all have to stand at some at the end of the day. What's the price of our integrity? And we all have a price, undoubtedly. Hopefully, it's high enough that we can keep it within that realm.
Now, do you often get called about, say, the economic impact of things? I know in St. Louis, we hear things because the Chamber of Commerce often comes up with statements like, the Cardinals are going to be in the World Series, this will generate, I don't know, $20 billion in revenue or something like this, and thousands of jobs. How do you respond to that? Because I give the wrong answer. I give them the answer they don't want. So I don't even get mentioned in the newspaper. So it's not even, I'm not even getting paid for it, but the newspapers won't even listen.
We have a journalism school on our campus too, and there are a lot of students who are looking for someone to say something, and so there's a few calls like that, and I tend to give the answer that there may be a transfer. So certainly, if the Cardinals are in the World Series, there are going to be people who are traveling to St. Louis to spend money, and the local economy is going to sell more stuff. I get it, but you also have to say, from a state perspective, if those people live in Rolla, well, they're not going to spend as much in Rolla. So from the state's perspective, there's no multiplier that's going on. It's just a transfer from goods and services produced in Rolla to goods and services produced in St. Louis.
Or they're not going out to the restaurant they were going to go out to in West County. They're going downtown to a game.
Even more local.
And I try to explain that, and apparently the number of slightly more than 0 is not the number they're looking for when they say, what's the impact of the Cardinals? Maybe it's just the Cardinals. It's such a...
Well, look, since I was a kid, I've loved the Redbirds, but that's a different question than whether they have an economic impact that's measurable in terms of state aggregate economic activity.
Now, what about the Royals? Because you're right in the middle, so is the blue-red line somewhere around there?
Well, I grew up, the Royals, the first 8 years of my life, the Royals didn't exist, so I didn't have trouble with that. So, yeah, it was really torn in the 1985 World Series. Not really. It was. I've been a Cardinals fan longer than a Royals fan.
Oh, okay.
Absent them not doing, not playing each other, I don't have any allegiance issues. No, when they play each other.
I'm with you, because I used to hate the Yankees because I'm from New York.
Sure.
Upstate New York, the real New York.
Yeah.
And they were big rivals in the 70s, so I was a big Royals fan from way back. Well, thanks for stopping by and chatting with us, and for attending our event today.
Thank you.
And it was great to have you. This has been Free Exchange, and I'm Howard Wall from the Hammond Institute for Free Enterprise at Lindenwood University.